My mom is sick." The girl pleaded to the millionaire, and his life was never the same again. Before the story begins, tell me in the comments. Where are you watching from? I'd really love to know how far these stories are reaching. And if you enjoy stories of love, resilience, and new beginnings, subscribe to the channel. It helps me keep creating and helps this space grow more and more. Your presence here makes all the difference. Denver International Airport woke under the weight of another ordinary day, though nothing in that place was truly ordinary. People rushed by with eyes glued to their phone screens, loudspeakers echoed robotic instructions, and in the background, the metallic clatter of luggage belts whirred non-stop. The polished marble floor reflected not just the cold lights above, but also the indifferent footsteps of an entire city that always seemed in a hurry, and always distant dot at the center of it all. Benjamin Whitaker walked with the precision of a man on a mission. Tall, squared shoulders, his dark gray tailored suit looked molded to his athletic frame. His dark brown hair, neatly trimmed on the sides and slightly wavy on top, didn't have a single strand out of place. His Italian shoes echoed confidence with every step. In his right hand, a cup of black coffee, still full. In the left, a phone blinking with notifications he didn't bother to check. He didn't smile, didn't rush. He looked around with the kind of awareness only the very rich and very empty possess, the kind that sees everything but notices nothing. Benjamin Whitaker was the CEO of one of the largest private airport and hotel networks in the country, and the airport he now stood in was, in part, his. But what mattered that day wasn't the newly renovated terminal or the reports his aides carried under their arms. It was a moment, a fragment of reality that would break the meticulous silence he had built around his soul. That's when he saw the girl. She appeared on the opposite side of the departure hall, small, frail, in a faded light blue dress that reached her knees. The fabric was stained, not from dirt, but from a hard life. Her worn-out coat seemed too big for her body, and her white sneakers, scuffed at the toes, looked like they had walked far beyond what a child's feet should. In one hand, she held a floppy-eared stuffed rabbit, clearly loved to its fabric bones. In the other, a crumpled vaccination card, as if it were an important document. The girl approached the barrier separating the public area from the restricted zone, looking around urgently, but without panic. Her eyes, large and hypnotically blue, were searching for something or someone. Two security guards noticed her and approached. One of them stepped in front of her. "Hey, sweetie, this area isn't allowed for unaccompanied kids. Are you lost?" She shook her head. Her voice was so quiet it took effort to understand. My mom is sick. She fell. She's not waking up, right?" Ben stopped. He didn't even realize his aides had gone ahead. His eyes locked on the girl like time had slowed down. That voice, that way of speaking, so calm and yet heavy with restrained fear. And most of all, that look. It was the same look his daughter, Grace, had on the days she wouldn't say a word. On the days he drove her to school and she just stared out the window with eyes full of something he couldn't name. Emptiness? Pain? Abandonment? It was a look that silently begged for help, and one he had ignored for far too long. Now he saw it again. In the eyes of a girl he didn't know. "What's your mother's name?" Ben asked as he approached her, voice soft, almost instinctive. She looked at him with suspicion, hugging the bunny tight to her chest. "Rachel Monroe. And your name?" "Sophie." Sophie. The name rang in his mind like a bell that refused to be ignored. Ben crouched down to meet her eyes. It was rare for him to kneel for anyone. Rare to let someone look him in the eye without his usual emotional distance. "Can you show me where she is?" She hesitated for a second, as if weighing whether the adult in front of her was trustworthy. But something in the way Ben spoke, or maybe the fact that he didn't treat her like a lost child convinced her. Sophie turned and began walking, saying nothing more, her small steps firm and purposeful. Ben followed. They passed through dimly lit service corridors, where the smell of cleaning products mingled with dampness and rust. It was a place executives didn't go. A place where people like Rachel existed without ever being seen. At the end of the hallway, Sophie pushed open a supply closet door with effort. The flickering light revealed a woman collapsed between two buckets, her head resting against the tiled wall, her body curled as if trying to hold on just a little longer. Rachel. She was pale, lips dry, light brown hair matted to her forehead with sweat. Her janitor uniform still neat, even on the floor. There was dignity in the way she had fainted, as if even while falling, she tried to protect the little she had left, her daughter, herself. Ben knelt beside her, forgetting his suit, his phone, his image. He touched two fingers to the woman's neck and felt a weak, irregular pulse. Her breathing was shallow, but she was still alive. Rachel. Can you hear me? He murmured. She didn't respond. Sophie stood silently at the door. Her expression wasn't fear, it was expectation. She knew this scene. She knew her mother sometimes passed out. She knew no one saw her. But now, someone was there. Ben grabbed his phone and called a private ambulance. In less than 30 seconds, he was relaying exact location details, insisting it be treated as top priority. He knew no worker there would get emergency care that fast unless he demanded it. When he hung up, he looked at Sophie. The girl clutched the bunny tighter. It's going to be okay, Sophie, I promise. She didn't answer, but for a brief moment, her blue eyes seemed to believe. The radio crackled in the supervisor's pocket as he hurried toward them, his heavy footsteps echoing through the narrow hallway. He was a middle-aged man with a prominent belly, an ID badge dangling from his chest, and a crook tie over a sweat-stained shirt, the kind of employee who holds authority only over those born without a voice. As soon as he spotted Rachel, collapsed on the floor of the cleaning closet, he narrowed his eyes, already judging before understanding. What is this now? He muttered, pushing the door open roughly. His gaze swept over Rachel on the ground, then paused on Sophie, and finally landed on the suited man beside the unconscious woman. His brow arched with disdain. This janitor skipped her shift. 3rd time this month. This is irresponsible. I'll have to report it to HR. Ben looked up slowly. His expression was cold, contained. His gaze steady and piercing, yet calm. He stepped between the manager and Rachel like a human wall. She's unconscious. Do you really think it's appropriate to bring up HR before ensuring she's breathing safely? The supervisor hesitated. He didn't recognize Ben, but the tone brooked no argument. Still, he pressed on. She has a history of absences. The company has to maintain discipline. No one here is above the rules. And who looks after the ones who keep this place running? Ben's voice was low, but razor sharp. She's not asking for a raise. She's collapsed on the floor of a supply closet. Do you see that? Sophie watched it all in silence, her tiny fingers gripping her stuffed rabbit. Her eyes were fixed on her mother's face, which now looked even paler under the flickering ceiling light. Rachel's hands trembled slightly, and a faint sound escaped her throat, almost an involuntary groan. Ben knelt again, grabbing a clean cloth from the supply cart and wetting it with water from his thermos. Gently, he pressed the damp cloth to Rachel's forehead. You're going to be okay, he murmured. He wasn't sure if he was speaking to her or to himself. A female security officer appeared at the door, uncertain how to react to the silent authority Ben radiated. The ambulance is on the way, sir. Did you request service directly through the internal system? Yes, and I want the medical team informed this is urgent. She's in physical collapse. Institutional negligence can cost a life. The supervisor turned red. Negligence? Now wait just a, what's the name of the outsourcing company? Ben interrupted, his gaze lifting with the air of a rhetorical question, though he clearly already knew the answer. Do you know what time? This woman started her shift? How many hours she's been working without rest? Silence. Ben stood up and stepped closer. Slowly but deliberately, each step weighted. He looked directly at the manager's badge. Mr. Harold, isn't it? The man swallowed hard. Yes, sir. Ben held his gaze. Take this as advice, not a threat. For now, Rachel coughed. A dry, rough cough that hurt just to hear. Sophie rushed to her side, kneeling carefully next to her mother. Mommy? She whispered, her voice thick with months of swallowed fear. I came back, okay? He came to help me. Rachel tried to open her eyes. They were heavy, blurry, but she saw a male figure beside her daughter. Her first instinct was fear. It always was. When a man came near, her instinct was to protect, retreat, shield Sophie. But the tone in her daughter's voice, there was peace. Ben watched her with a mixture of concern and something harder to define, a strange knot forming in his chest. Why did this woman affect him so deeply? Why, among hundreds of invisible workers who passed through that airport? Every day, was it this unknown janitor who made him stop? From the hallway, the rushed footsteps of the medical team could be heard approaching. The sound of radios and the creak of the stretcher broke the silence like the announcement of change. Ben looked at Rachel one last time before the team surrounded her. We're taking her now, sir, said the paramedic, checking her vitals. Signs of acute exhaustion, dehydration, burnout. It's serious but stable. Sophie squeezed her mother's hand before letting go slowly. Her eyes were full of water, but no tears fell. She was used to holding them back. She didn't ask who the man was. She simply turned to him and said, "Thank you." Ben knelt too, her eye level again. The girl's eyes seemed to say much more than her words ever could. You did the right thing, Sophie. And now it's my turn to do the same. She nodded quietly. The elevator doors closed with Rachel inside. Ben stood there for a long moment, as if something within him had begun to crack, slowly, like the silence before a storm. He didn't know it yet. But that woman had just become impossible to ignore. The brightness of the hospital room filtered through the half-open blinds, casting soft beams across the white sheets. The silence was thick, interrupted only by the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor and the discreet sound of shallow breathing. Rachel Monroe opened her eyes slowly. Her head throbbed, her muscles felt twice as heavy, and her throat was as dry as old paper. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The white ceiling, the ID band on her thin wrist, the antiseptic smell. All signs pointed to one place, hospital. Again, she tried to move, but her body didn't respond the way she wanted. Her left arm trembled slightly as she pulled the sheet aside. When she turned her head, she saw a chair by the bed. In it, a man, tall, impeccably dressed, with an expression somewhere between concern and restraint. A dark suit, an expensive watch. A face she didn't know, but instinctively judged. She blinked, trying to stay alert. Her voice came out hoarse-weak. Sorry, where's my daughter? Ben leaned forward a little, his expression softened by contained anxiety. Sophie's fine. She's with a hospital social worker in the room next door. She stayed with you the whole time until she fell asleep. I stayed just in case. Rachel closed her eyes for a second, relieved by the answer, but unsettled by his presence. That man didn't belong in her world. The polished shoes, the well-groomed skin, the steady voice. He was the kind of man she saw in hotel elevators. While cleaning, always looking past her, never at her. She tried to sit up, but he stood up on impulse. "Wait, you're still weak." The doctor asked for complete rest for the next few hours. Rachel looked at him, her green-gray eyes sharp, the eyes of someone who's been deceived too many times to let her guard down. "Who are you?" Ben hesitated. The question seemed simple, but the answer shook him in an unexpected way. "I'm someone who was there when Sophie asked for help. My name is Benjamin Whitaker." Rachel looked at him again, then lowered her gaze. The name wasn't familiar, but the tone was. That polished kindness. That way of speaking as if the world were within his reach. "And do you usually go around saving strangers?" she asked, trying to sound sarcastic, though her trembling voice betrayed her weakness. Ben gave a tired half-smile. "No. In fact, I think it's the first time I've ever done something like this." "But your daughter was persistent." Rachel ran a hand over her forehead, feeling the damp skin. "She's brave." "More than I'd like sometimes. She was incredible, Rachel." No one stopped to listen to her, but she didn't give up. Rachel went quiet. A knot formed in her throat, not just from emotion, but from the weight of vulnerability. The last time a man praised her, he left her pregnant and disappeared in the middle of a shift change. And now here she was, lying in a hospital bed, with a wealthy stranger at her side. Humiliated, weak, dependent. Everything she swore she'd never be again. She stared at him. Her eyes hardened. "Look, thank you for helping my daughter. Really. But you don't need to stay. I'll manage." Ben furrowed his brow slightly. "I'm not here out of obligation." "Exactly," she replied quickly, almost reflexively. "I don't owe you anything, and I don't want charity." He looked at her in silence for a few seconds. He sensed there was something deeper there. This wasn't just pride. It was defense. The fear of giving in to something that had once hurt her. "Sophie told me you work nights at the airport. And you study too, is that right?" Rachel hesitated. "Yes, nursing. I do what I can. I work the night shift, study in the morning, and in between, I'm a mom. The rest doesn't matter." "It does matter," Ben said softly. "It matters to Sophie. And now, it matters to me too." Rachel turned her face away, trying to hold back the flood of emotion swelling in her chest. She was tired. Not just in her body, but in her soul. Tired of having to be strong all the time. Tired of fighting everything with no one by her side. Tired of always mistrusting anyone who came close with an apparently kind gesture. Ben noticed her breathing change. The stiffness in her neck. The tension in her hands. "I didn't come here to invade your life, Rachel. I just couldn't walk away after seeing what I saw." She looked at him again, now with less hardness in her eyes, but still distant. "It's just, people like me don't have anyone who stays. When we get sick, we lose our jobs. When we're tired, we're called weak. When we shout, no one hears. And when someone finally listens, we get suspicious. Because usually, it comes with a cost." Ben felt the weight of her words. For the first time, they didn't hit him like arguments, but like truth. A truth he'd never lived, but that now stood exposed before him in the tired eyes of a woman who, even in collapse, never lost her dignity. From the hallway, Sophie's soft voice could be heard calling for her mother. Rachel tried to sit up. Again, but couldn't. Ben gently helped her, placing his hands behind her back, careful to respect her space. "Your daughter needs you, and you need to rest. You're not alone anymore." Rachel didn't answer. But she didn't push him away either, and that silent gesture was the closest thing to a maybe Ben had ever received. Ben left the hospital that night without saying much. Not to Rachel, not to the medical team, not even to the social worker trying to confirm if he was a relative of Sophie. He simply gave a quiet nod and disappeared through the automatic doors. Outside, the Denver air was cold and damp, as if the city carried the same invisible exhaustion as the woman he had just met. Back in the car, he sat in the back seat without haste. The driver waited for instructions, then stared blankly out. The window, the reflection of headlights slowly passing across his tired eyes. For the first time in a long while, the silence inside him wasn't comfortable. It was unsettling. Unsettling like Rachel's gaze when she said, "People like me don't have anyone who stays." The next morning, Ben didn't go to the office. He canceled meetings, rejected calls, postponed flights. Instead, he put on dark jeans and a simple wool coat, as if trying to disappear from his own name dot in the outskirts of 5 Points. The contrast with Denver's corporate center was jarring. Houses had peeling paint, many with windows boarded up or covered with old blankets. A skinny dog rummaged through a fallen trash bag on the sidewalk. Power lines crisscrossed like tangled webs above the poles. And still, there was a strange beauty there. Children playing with a makeshift cart, women sweeping sidewalks with dignity, old men sitting on porches watching time go by, as if that was all they had left. Ben stepped out of the car in front of a faded brick building. Had the address. He didn't quite know what he was looking for. Maybe a clue to why that woman unsettled him so much. Or maybe, without admitting it, he just wanted to understand how someone could live with so little and still love with so much. He climbed the creaky steps of the outdoor staircase and knocked on the door of apartment 3B. It was the neighbor who opened, a sharp-eyed Hispanic woman with gray hair tied up in a makeshift bun. "You looking for Rachel?" she asked, suspicious. Ben nodded. "I'm a friend of her daughter's." She narrowed her eyes, then let out a sigh. "There. Not here. The little girl's with the social worker and Rachel. Well, she won't be back until she's discharged." Ben hesitated. The woman continued, "You can come in. Nothing to hide in there. She gave me the key once, just in case something happened." When he stepped inside, he felt the impact of a world he had never known. The room was small. Just a mattress on the floor with neatly folded sheets. A small desk against the wall, covered in worn nursing books and scribbled notebooks. A shoebox served as a knit stand, with a handmade photo frame where Sophie had drawn hearts around a picture, her and Rachel sitting on a park bench. The frame was cracked in one corner but held together with tape. The smell in the room was clean, despite the poverty. An old fan tried to push air into the stifling space. On the wall, hung by a crooked nail, was a janitor's uniform, clean and folded with great care. And on the table, taped in place, was a handwritten schedule. Monday to Friday, 0 o'clock to 6 o'clock, airport shift. 7 o'clock to 12 o'clock. Classes, technical college, 13 o'clock to 14 o'clock. Sleep, if possible, 14:30. Pick up Sophie, daycare, 17 o'clock. Study dinner. Ben read that paper like it was a sacred document. This wasn't just a routine. It was resistance. Each line was a battle won at the cost of her own body. He sat on the edge of the mattress, feeling something between anguish and shame. How many times had he, in his company, shaken hands with investors who laughed at things like this? How many times had he dismissed talks about inequality as exaggeration? How often had his own team negotiated contracts with outsourcing companies that cut costs specifically by exploiting people? Like Rachel? He didn't want to admit it, but he knew. The life he led was built on the backs of hundreds of invisible Rachels, who cleaned, organized, cared, and were never seen. That night, alone in his penthouse apartment, surrounded by glass walls and luxury silence, Ben couldn't sleep. The image of Sophie's photo atop Rachel's notebook wouldn't leave his mind. And neither would the words spoken with such care in the hospital. "People like me don't have anyone who stays." The next morning, he called the company's legal department. I want the names and contracts of every cleaning company we work with. All of them, starting with the airport." The lawyer on the other end hesitated. "Mr. Whitaker, that's going to stir things up. These companies were chosen for cost effectiveness, and there are contractual clauses that then break the clauses," Ben cut in, firmly. "What's costing me now isn't money, it's conscience." Before hanging up, he looked at his reflection in the glass wall, and for the first time, he felt ashamed of who he had become. The seventh-floor hall of the Whitaker Holdings building was adorned in neutral tones, elegant enough to impress, but far too polished to feel welcoming. White floral arrangements, LED panels looping animated, logos and silent waiters gliding between guests with orbs perfectly balanced on sleek trays. It was the kind of corporate event designed for photographs and contracts, not for people. But that afternoon, a small exception was about to unfold. Ben wandered among the guests with a distracted gaze. His posture was straight and his dark tailored suit as sharp as ever, but his mind was elsewhere. Since the day he'd stood in Rachel's apartment, something in his world had shifted. His once well-armored conscience had begun to make noise. He watched investors chat in circles, fake smiles flashing, glasses raised out of habit more than joy. None of it made sense anymore. And yet, there he was. Farther ahead, his daughter Grace sat alone in an armchair by the tall glass window. She stared at the city below as if she were miles away from everything and everyone. Her beige cotton dress seemed to swallow her small, thin frame. Her platinum blonde hair fell like soft curtains around her pale face. Her blue eyes, beautiful yet heavy, carried a silence too vast for her age. Since losing her mother, Grace had barely spoken. It was as if she'd locked herself in a place no one could reach. Ben watched her from a distance, his chest tight with a kind of emptiness he couldn't name. He wanted to reach her, but he didn't know how. On the other end of the room, Sophie walked carefully, her small hand gripping the index finger of a social worker who tried to seem at ease among heels and composed expressions. Rachel was still recovering, and the hospital director had suggested Sophie spend the day under the worker's supervision, a kind woman, but distracted. Ben had authorized the girl's presence at the event, claiming he wanted to better understand her reality. But deep down, it was more than that. Something he couldn't yet explain. Sophie let go of the woman's finger when she saw Grace, as if something about the quiet girl called to her. She didn't hesitate. She simply walked over, light-footed and steady-eyed. She stopped in front of the armchair, clutching her stuffed bunny to her chest. Grace didn't look right away, but she felt her. Her gaze shifted from the city to Sophie's eyes. No words. Just the kind of silence only children touched by grief can share. Sophie was the first to smile. A small, almost shy smile. She held out her bunny to Grace as if saying, "I'll share." Grace looked at the toy, then at Sophie's eyes. Slowly, she reached out and touched one of the bunny's ears. "Does he have a name?" she asked suddenly, her voice hoarse from disuse. Sophie nodded. "Oliver. He's been with me since the day my mom cried at the hospital and thought I didn't see." Grace blinked slowly. That wasn't just an explanation. It was a confession. And somehow, it made perfect sense to her. "My mom had a blue scarf. I don't let anyone wash it. It still smells like her." They looked at each other in silence. Ben, at a distance, watched the scene with something between awe and heartache. It was the first time in months he'd seen Grace engage with someone voluntarily. There was no tension, no fear. Only a quiet connection that didn't need explanation. Sophie sat beside Grace in the armchair. The two girls stayed there, side by side, sharing the silence. One holding the bunny, the other gripping the hem of her dress. Neither wanted to break whatever was forming there, something fragile, but real. when the social worker came to fetch Sophie, the little girl turned to Grace with a serious expression. "If you want, I can lend you Oliver for today." Grace hesitated, then gently took the bunny in her arms as if it were something sacred. For the first time since her mother's funeral, she smiled. "Thank you." Ben swallowed hard. He wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. And then, for the first time, he felt that maybe Sophie wasn't just a connection to Rachel. Maybe she was the bridge the world had been trying to build to Rachel. And to his own daughter. The call came at 7:42 a.m. while Ben was finishing his second coffee, standing before the panoramic window of his office. On the other end, Eleanor Chambers' dry and elegant voice cut through the air with the same coldness she had always shown him. "Can we speak in person, Benjamin? It's about your do companion." Ben closed his eyes for a second, already anticipating what was coming. But he agreed. He knew Eleanor never made courtesy calls. By late afternoon, she arrived at the Whitaker Holdings headquarters with the calculated punctuality of someone who had always had access to everything. She wore an ivory Chanel set, dark shoes, and a pearl necklace that seemed heavier than symbolic. Her expensive perfume announced her presence before she entered the room. She sat across from him without a greeting. "Benjamin, I'll be brief. I've been informed." "About the cleaning woman and her daughter." Ben didn't reply. He watched Eleanor like one might watch a silent earthquake about to begin. "You think this will go unnoticed? The board is already whispering. And if you want to keep the position you've earned, I suggest you think carefully about what you're doing. I'm helping a child and a woman with more dignity than half our board. This isn't about cheap moralism. It's about image. You're the widower of my daughter Benjamin, the sole heir to the empire she helped build. Getting emotionally involved with a janitor with a history of abandonment. She doesn't have a history of abandonment. She was abandoned. To the public eye, that makes no difference," Eleanor shot back, unflinching. "If this woman appears in public with you, near your daughter, tied to your brand, everything crumbles. I will not allow my granddaughter to grow up watching her father turn grief into scandal." The word scandal hit like a punch. Eleanor knew where to strike. "You want me to make her disappear, is that it?" Ben muttered, struggling to contain his anger. "No, I want you to remember who you are and who she is, and to understand the difference between pity and responsibility." Eleanor stood, adjusting the strap of her bag on her shoulder. "You have until tomorrow, or I will personally deliver this to the press." She placed an envelope on the desk. Inside, photos discreetly taken the day Rachel left the hospital. Sophie was asleep on Ben's shoulder as he carried her to the car. It was a beautiful image, but it had been captured with malicious eyes. That night, Ben didn't sleep. He spent hours staring at the photo, angry at himself for allowing someone to intrude on something so intimate. He knew Rachel wouldn't be able to handle that kind of exposure. And he also knew exactly the kind of hell Eleanor could unleash. On Grace. The next morning, Rachel appeared in the lobby of the company building with a folder in hand. She had been called by one of the directors under the pretense of a formal thank you for her services to the airport. She was nervous, but hopeful. She wore her usual clean uniform, her hair tied carefully, her face fresh, though still marked with exhaustion. Sophie was by her side, clutching her bunny, smiling, happy to be there again. Ben came down to the lobby. He was surrounded by executives and assistants. The atmosphere was formal, controlled. When Rachel's eyes met his, she smiled. Small, discreet, but sincere. She expected him, but what came was something else entirely. Ben approached, his eyes cold, his expression hard. "Rachel, you shouldn't be here without authorization." She blinked. confused. But I was called. They said there was a meeting with, it was a mistake. It happens. We appreciate your work during your time with us. But there's no further need for involvement with my team, professionally or personally. Rachel stood in silence for a few seconds, trying to understand if she had heard him right. You're sending me away? She asked, her voice calm, not raised. I'm just clarifying the boundaries. I hope you understand. It's nothing personal. The words cut deeper than any scream could. Sophie clutched her bunny tighter, staring at the floor. The smile vanished. Rachel stood there, frozen, trying not to cry in front of so many eyes. I understand. Her voice came out low. It happens. She turned slowly, gently pulling her daughter by the hand. When the glass doors closed behind them, Ben felt the weight of what he had done, but he remained still. He had just protected Rachel and destroyed everything that existed between them. Ben spent the following days as a man split between reason and remorse. At work, he made decisions with mechanical coldness. At home, he wandered through the rooms, mind elsewhere. Grace watched him from a distance, sitting on the living room rug, coloring with quiet focus while her father stared blankly at the reflection of his own conscience. He had done what he thought was right. Protected Rachel from exposure, preserved the company's image, avoided scandal. But no logic could ease the silent ache gnawing at him since the moment he saw Rachel turn away in the lobby. Sophie at her side, head down, her eyes dim, had never known how to handle real emotion. So when it finally entered his life, in the form of two lives that trusted him, he pushed it away with carefully crafted words. And now, all that remained was the echo of everything he hadn't had the courage to feel. On a cloudy Saturday afternoon, Ben came home earlier than usual. Grace was in the living room, her hair in two loose braids, wearing a soft sweatshirt embroidered with teddy bears and mismatched colorful socks. She was seated on the floor, deeply focused, drawing with small, deliberate strokes on a sheet of paper. When she saw him come in, she didn't run to hug him. She just looked. A quiet, heavy look, as if she already knew everything he needed to hear and simply waited for him to be ready. Ben sat slowly on the couch, still wearing his coat. He rubbed the back of his neck like a man trying to loosen an invisible burden, until he heard her voice for the first time in days. "Daddy?" He looked up. "Yes, sweetheart." Grace approached slowly, her little hands holding the paper. She handed it to him like she was giving him something sacred, then walked back to her corner of the room and sat again. Ben looked at the drawing. It was simple, but devastating. A woman with long brown hair lay on the ground, blue tears falling. From her face, a blonde girl in a blue dress held her hand. Beside them, a man in a black suit stood with his back turned, and at the top of the page, written in shaky, childish handwriting, "You made my mom cry like my dad did." The sentence hit Ben so hard he almost dropped the paper. It sliced through his defenses like a blade. He looked at the picture again. The stuffed bunny was drawn in the girl's hands. The dark suit on the man left no doubt. It was him. His hands began to tremble. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. His throat tightened. He stood up, pacing in circles, as if his body were trying to run from a truth his mind could no longer avoid. Grace watched with teary eyes. She didn't say a word, but her silence screamed everything. Ben stopped in front of the large mirror in the living room. He stared at his reflection with a mix of disgust and regret. He had become exactly what he swore he'd never be. A man who walks away, who repeats the cycle, who watches someone fall and turns away. He clutched his chest, like trying to stop something breaking inside. Oh God, what did I do? Grace came closer slowly. She touched her father's arm and, for the first time, spoke with gentle clarity. She didn't want anything. She just wanted someone to stay. Ben dropped to his knees before his daughter, holding her tightly. He buried his face in her lap, finally willing to feel everything he had spent a lifetime avoiding. Night fell over the city like a gray veil. Outside, the world kept moving. Cars passed, lives continued. But inside that apartment, a man who had never known how to love properly was beginning to wake up. And there, in his daughter's arms, Benjamin Whitaker realized he couldn't wait any longer. He had to fix what he had broken, before it was too late. A fine rain fell over Denver that late afternoon, painting the city in a melancholy gray that mirrored the atmosphere inside the small room at the community hospital. Rachel sat on the edge of the cot, wearing a faded hospital gown and a borrowed infirmary coat. Her eyes were sunken, skin still pale, hair loose over her shoulders, too fragile even to tie. Across from her, the social worker sat with a clipboard in her lap and a tone of professionalism poorly disguised as compassion. "Rachel, you need to understand, we're not taking your daughter. We're simply suggesting a temporary measure. Until you're back on your feet." Rachel didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the rain-slicked window, where droplets slid down the glass like tears falling for her. It's for Sophie's safety. She needs a stable environment with proper meals, supervision, a routine. You're unwell, unemployed, without a stable home, and you're visibly exhausted. Rachel bit her lip, trying to steady her trembling hands. Her heart was bleeding, but reason shouted louder. Sophie had already endured too much. Rachel couldn't keep dragging her through every fall, even if that meant letting her go for a while. "Can I see her?" she asked in a whisper. "Yes, with scheduled visits. And once your situation improves, you can apply for custody reinstatement." Rachel signed the papers with the weight of a sentence. The pen felt like it weighed a ton. Each letter carved out a piece of her soul. At the end, the social worker thanked her with a tense smile and left the room. Alone, Rachel finally let the tears fall. Not loud, just a quiet, defeated sob, the kind that comes from someone who already knows. That screaming never helps. The next morning, Sophie woke in the shelter where she'd been taken. It was clean but impersonal. Beds lined in rows, toys stacked in plastic bins, adults with trained smiles and controlled voices. She didn't understand what had happened. She only knew her mother wasn't there, and no one truly explained why. While the other children watched a cartoon in the common room, Sophie sat in a corner with her stuffed bunny on her lap. She hugged it tightly. Her gaze was distant. The absence of her mother felt like a hole inside her, a silence deeper than any adult around her could ever comprehend. And then she remembered. The airport, the man in the dark suit, the promise. "It's going to be okay. I promise." Sophie wasn't one to wait. She was small, but she understood loss. She knew that if she didn't do something, maybe no one would doubt, so when one of the caregivers stepped out to take a phone call, she seized the moment. She grabbed her little backpack with the bunny inside, zipped up her jacket, the one with the crooked zipper, crept down the back stairs in silence, and walked to the nearest bus stop. She'd done this route before with her mom on work days. She knew the terminal number. She knew where to find him. At Whitaker Holdings, Ben was in a meeting with foreign investors. Charts, projections, contracts. Everything that once fueled his life now felt empty. Still, he kept his composure until his phone vibrated softly on the table. He ignored it once, and again. But the third time, the name on the screen made his heart jump. The shelter's social worker, Mr. Whitaker. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but Sophie Monroe disappeared from the shelter this morning. A staff member said she asked about the airport. We think she may be trying to get to you." Ben went cold. "She left alone?" "Yes, we believe she took a bus. We're trying to locate her." The police have been notified. Ben stood up abruptly. Excuse me. I have to leave, now. Mr. Whitaker, the contracts. Cancel everything. This meeting is over. He rushed down the building floors with urgent steps, heart racing. Every second felt dangerous. Sophie was just a child, fragile, vulnerable. And he had pushed her away just like he had her mother. The thought of her, alone and afraid, surrounded by airport noise and indifferent strangers, made his chest tighten. He reached the airport in under 15 minutes. Ran through the terminals, scanning each section, questioning employees, showing her picture on his phone. And then, near the old cleaning supply area, the same place where he first met Rachel, he saw a small figure sitting beside a vending machine. Blonde hair, red backpack. The bunny in her lap, Sophie. The girl looked up slowly. When she saw him, she didn't run. She simply stood, her expression steady. There was sadness in her eyes, but also trust. She knew he would come. I didn't know where else to go, she said softly. I thought, maybe you could help me again. Ben knelt in front of her and wrapped his arms around her. He closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of her hair, the fragile warmth of her little body. And for the first time, he cried. Not out of pity, but out of regret. You'll never have to run again, Sophie. I promise. The day of the new terminal's grand opening arrived beneath Denver's clear sky, with flags fluttering, cameras being adjusted, and a line of dark-suited executives standing like chess pieces on a corporate board. It was the most anticipated event of the semester, filled with speeches, flashbulbs, and a live business broadcast. As always, the CEO of Whitaker Holdings was expected to make his signature appearance. Punctual, polished, untouchable. But that day, Benjamin Whitaker did not arrive alone. The first curious glances began when the black car pulled up in front of the podium. The door opened and Ben stepped out, navy blue suit, pale shirt, a restrained but intense expression on his face. He wasn't looking for investors or mayors or cameras. He was looking for dignity. He was looking for truth. By his side, holding his hand, was Sophie. The little girl wore a simple white dress, her blonde hair in two soft braids, her stuffed bunny clutched in her arms. Around them, silence, heavy, uncomfortable. No one understood. No one dared interrupt. Just behind them walked Grace, composed, her blue eyes glistening slightly. She wore a powder blue dress with delicate lace. It was her first public appearance since her mother's funeral. She walked with quiet confidence, but also visible emotion. She was there by choice. Ben took the microphone, held it with both hands. Breath deep. His voice came out clear and steady, but with the tremble of a man who had finally chosen not to hide. Today, you all expected to hear about numbers, expansion, targets, and profits. But what I need to share has nothing to do with any of that. It has to do with humanity. Some journalists exchanged looks. Cameras adjusted their focus. Ben continued, "This girl beside me is Sophie Monroe. She's not my daughter. She doesn't have my blood or my last name. But she gave me something I hadn't had in a long time, the ability to see again. And because of her, I began to see my own daughter, to see myself, to see who I had become." Sophie looked up at him in silence. She didn't smile, but her gaze was gentle. Trusting. Ben went on. "I made mistakes, serious ones. I judged a woman for her job, her uniform, her silence. And when I had the chance to do better, I chose cowardice. I chose to protect my reputation instead of the truth. And I hurt someone who only wanted to be seen." The camera zoomed in. There was too much sincerity for this to be rehearsed. The mask was gone. Rachel Monroe is one of the strongest women I've ever met, and if she let me, I want to ask forgiveness, publicly, not as a CEO, but as a man, as a father, as someone who finally understands that no amount of prestige is worth more than the courage to stand beside those who deserve it. The audience remained utterly silent, a silence heavier than any applause. Ben lowered the microphone and, hand in hand with both girls, walked off the stage. He ignored questions, ignored reporters, ignored whispers. He got straight into the car that was already waiting, with only one destination in mind: the hospital. Rachel sat on the edge of her bed, her hair pulled into a loose bun, her eyes tired. She wore a clean hospital gown with a wool sweater over it. It had been days since she'd seen Sophie. Her chest ached with longing and doubt. When the nurse told her someone was here to see her, she only nodded, without hope. She expected nothing anymore. But when the door opened, the world stopped. Sophie entered first. She ran to her mother and hugged her so tightly that Rachel gasped from the emotion. "Mommy, he came back." Ben stepped in right after. He looked at Rachel with the full weight of shame on his shoulders, but didn't hide it. "Rachel, please listen to me." She said nothing. Her eyes were wet, but steady. "I hurt you in every possible way. I was weak, arrogant, cowardly. I thought that pushing you away would protect you. But all I did was repeat the one thing I swore I'd never do: abandon you." Rachel gripped her daughter's hand tightly, still silent. Sophie looked between the two of them, her heart in her throat. Then Grace stepped forward. She looked at Rachel with clear, glistening eyes. "I just wanted to thank you for taking care of Sophie, for being the kind of mom who stays." Those words were what Rachel never expected to hear, a thank you from his daughter. And for the first time, she cried without fear. Ben took a slow step forward. And then, in a gesture free of pride, he knelt before her. "If there's still room in your heart, I don't want to run anymore. Not from you. Not from myself. Let me stay. This time, for real." Rachel looked at him. The pain was still there, but so was something new in her eyes. Hope. The months that followed that reunion at the hospital changed everything. But slowly, truthfully, with open wounds, learning how to breathe beyond pain, Rachel was discharged, with instructions to rest, but her energy was different. There was a new light in her eyes, not one untouched by suffering, but one shaped by it. A light that came from watching Sophie sleep peacefully each night, Bunny still in her arms, but no longer with fear in her chest. Ben arranged a new home for the two of them. Not a palace, not a favor, but a space Rachel could truly call her own, with her own keys. A bright, airy apartment in a quiet neighborhood, with books piled on the living room table and Sophie's drawings taped to the walls. Rachel returned to her studies with renewed strength, and for the first time in her life, she dreamed without fear of waking. Sophie, now safe, smiled again. Her eyes still carried the past, but they already knew how to recognize joy. She ran through the halls of the new home, video called Grace every day, and made frequent visits in person. And she never forgot to repeat the words that had changed her world: "He didn't save me." "You did, Mommy." Rachel cried when she heard it, but not from sadness, from understanding. For so long, she believed she needed someone to rescue her. Now she understood. It was her quiet courage that held everything together. Grace changed, too. The words returned, first whispered, then full sentences. And on a sunny afternoon in the park, watching Sophie build a sandcastle with messy, happy hands, she looked at her father and said, "She reminds me of Mom," but without the sadness. Ben almost broke down. He squeezed his daughter's hand, said nothing. Some truths are meant to be felt, not answered. At the headquarters of Whitaker Holdings, A new sign was installed above the entrance to a newly created wing, Projeto Rises, a program offering temporary housing, scholarships, psychological support, and healthcare access to single mothers in vulnerable situations. The team was made up of experienced professionals, many of them once invisible employees of the company. Ben personally attended the meetings. He listened. He learned. He canceled old contracts with exploitative service providers. He redirected millions toward efforts that once didn't even appear in the spreadsheets. He wasn't chasing prestige anymore. He was seeking redemption. At one of these meetings, a young employee approached him with a timid smile. "Mr. Whitaker, is it true that this all started because of a girl who showed up at the airport?" Ben gave a half smile and glanced at the framed photo on the glass shelf. Sophie, Rachel, and Grace sitting on a park bench, smiling in the sun. "No, this all started the moment I stopped thinking I was too important to listen to someone small." That same evening, in the gentle quiet of their new home, Rachel sat on the bed and watched as Ben tucked Sophie in. She was already drifting off, Bunny clutched in her arms, hair scattered across the pillow. Rachel moved closer and sat beside him. They stayed in silence for a moment, as if savoring the miracle of simple things. "Do you still feel guilty?" she asked gently. Ben looked at Sophie. Then at Rachel. "No, I feel responsible. And that changes me." She smiled and took his hand firmly. "Then this time, will you stay?" Ben nodded, eyes glistening. "This time I stay. And I'll never leave you again." The love that formed there wasn't perfect. It wasn't heroic. It was real. Born from chaos, nurtured by courage, and sustained by the daily choice to remain. It wasn't a fairy tale love. It was a love that stayed. And in the end, that was all they ever needed. And now, what did you think of this story? Leave your rating from 0 to 10 in the comments. I'd love to know how deeply it touched you. If this story moved you in any way, give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear this today, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next ones. Before you go, I picked another emotional story that's bound to touch your heart even more. It's waiting for you right here on the side.